You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 131, Speaking Persian. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast in conversation with multilinguals. This week's episode, we're talking with Yara Elmjouie, who is a James Beard Award-winning, Emmy-nominated journalist for AJ+, about his language of Persian. I've been a big fan of Yara's work for a long time, and I'm thrilled to have had the chance to talk with him about Persian language and Iranian and Iranian-American culture and heritage. In this episode, we talk about some of his favorite things about Persian language, including direct object identifiers and its similarity to other languages he's familiar with. We talk about growing up between the US and Iran, navigating the cultural differences between the two places. Yara talks to us about exploring rural parts of Iran with his dad and encountering firsthand how language varies around the country. He also tells us about his path to becoming a journalist and being intentional about reconnecting to his Persian heritage. Big thank you to Yara for this conversation and for sharing your language, culture, and your work with all of us. If you enjoy this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. If you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now pledge ongoing support for the show on buymeacoffee.com or on patreon.com. Special shout out to Speaking Tongues' recent supporters and patrons, Heidi L, Linnea H, Pat N, and Jari A. For just $5 a month, you will have access to excerpts of this conversation that did not make it to the full published episode. And as you know, I wrote a book. My food zine of international language and cuisine, Taste Buds Volume 1, is available now for purchase. Check social media for the sneak peek inside the book and make sure you purchase one for yourself and one for your friends. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I am so excited to have this conversation and to welcome Yara to Speaking Tongues. How are you today, Yara?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited as well.
Yeah, and I have to, full disclosure, I told you, but maybe my guests don't know, I have wanted to have a conversation with you for so long. So this is such a pleasure for me and such a joy to get to talk about your languages, your culture, and your work. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, me too. No, I mean, we talked a little about some of the stuff and that we might be discussing today. So I'm very excited to talk to you about all this. I love languages. I'm a huge language buff. So
awesome. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Okay. So the first language I learned to speak was Persian, which sometimes is referred to as Farsi. Iranians call it Farsi in their own language. And yeah, that was the first language I learned to speak. And it was mainly because that was the language that my parents were speaking to me in and the language that they were strongest in. They're, from Iran. Farsi, Persian is their native language. So yeah, that was that. And then I learned English basically in American, public school from, my classmates and what have you.
Yeah. Should we be saying Persian or Farsi?
So this is so funny.
Or what do you think?
Yeah. I know this is like a age-old question now that even Iranians sort of debate. So what's interesting is that in the English language, the language of Iran is referred to as Persian. It is that's the name of the language in English. Similar to how Spanish, we call Spanish Spanish. We don't call it Espanol. We call German German. We don't call it Deutsche. We don't call, French is not referred to as Français, even though that's how the French would say it.
Yeah.
So Persian and Farsi have a similar dynamic where Persian is what the language is called in the English language. And then Farsi is what Iranians call their language in their language when they're speaking to each other. That said, because of the use basically of both words, both words have become very common. And so a lot of Iranians who immigrate here, obviously, they're just like, oh, people ask them what language you speak, and they immediately say, well, oh, I speak Farsi. Like there's no really, and it's such an easy to pronounce word in English anyway. So I feel that's why over the years, both have sort of become common. And so I don't really personally mind which one. I personally use Persian. Some say Farsi, some alternate, but they are referring to the same thing in the context of Iran.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I learned that like Persian can also refer to like Dari as it's
Mm-hmm.
spoken in
Afghanistan. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. So that's like, for me, like learning all this stuff is so cool and just like how things are connected and have been connected before our modern political borders. I think it's like super important. And
Just on a note about that, it's just really interesting. So Persian you can consider to be like the father sort of language category. And then in Iran, Persian is referred to as Farsi. In Afghanistan, Persian is referred to as Dari or Dari in English. And then in Tajikistan, it's just Tajik. So like you really get, those three are all Persian, those three countries. But again, they refer to them in their own, sort of way, if that makes sense.
yeah. Have you had any contact with these other languages where you're able to notice similarities and differences between them?
So they are fundamentally the same.
Oh,
It's
okay.
kind of like almost, I guess maybe a comparison might be similar to saying like the Spanish that's spoken in, I mean, now there's a lot more similarities with the internet and satellite TV and all that stuff. But like, I guess
Yeah.
the Spanish that's spoken in Bolivia versus the Spanish that's spoken in Spain versus, yeah. So that sort of is the dissimilarity maybe between the Persian that's spoken in Iran and the Persian that's spoken in Afghanistan. I sometimes am called upon for my company to translate sound bites from, in Dari from, Afghans. And I mostly understand, but every now and again, they'll use different words.
Mm.
And I just can't understand either the accent or they're using a couple, vocab words that may be drawn from Arabic or may be drawn from English or may actually be drawn from Old Persian, like it's a
Oh,
pure Old Persian word that Afghans still use and Iranians now use an Arabic word instead. Or it's very, yeah, it gets very complex. But yeah,
wow.
yeah, it's funny how which languages decide to keep and hold on to certain words from the original language, and then other
Yeah.
dialects don't. They might use an American word instead or French word
Right.
sometimes. It's very funny.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Man, I love what language does. And, even saying like holding on to like old Persian or just,
hmm
wow, that's so interesting.
So as I understand, I hope I'm correct because I remember reading this, but like in Afghanistan, the word that is used for uncle, I suppose, is kaka, and that's an old Persian word. And Iranians use the Arabic amu.
Mm.
Amu is a fully Arabic, yeah, so word. And it's just fascinating to see that again, Iran, you would assume, they speak Persian, Afghans speak Persian, but yeah, again, the Afghans are actually using, in that case, a more traditional kind of original Persian word for this concept.
I love
All sorts of
that.
historical reasons as to, yeah.
I love that. Such a like rich historical region too, like linguistically, culturally, food-wise, music. Like
Mm,
I'm like enamored.
no.
Enamored. I just think it's like so beautiful. Do you want to talk a bit about the language and just
hmm
like, when we're speaking Farsi, give us some idea of how the language is constructed. Like, how do we form sentences?
Mm.
Do we have genders? Is it tonal or, any other features of the language that you find interesting?
Totally. Ooh, so many things. Okay, so because I mean, this is like perfect conversation for me because I mean, I feel like in an alternate life, I would have become a linguistics, major or something in college.
Mhm.
So one of the most interesting things with Persian, and I've noticed this with Japanese as well, and I believe Turkish, I think, has this. Although again, I'm not a master linguist, but I think this has been brought to my attention that it's common in these languages. But we have this thing called a direct object identifier. So imagine in English, you say, I drink the water, right? In that sentence, the object, basically the thing that has the action performed on it, is the water. The water is being drunk. Like that is the thing that the verb is doing a thing to, if I can explain it that way. In Persian, what we do is that, well, we obviously we have direct objects and all these things, but we have a direct object identifier, a marker, essentially, an additional sound that we add to the sentence that indicates, hey, this is the thing that's having a verb performed on it. So let me explain. Basically, you would say, for example, okay, I'm going to say it in Persian. I drink the water. Man ab ra mikhoram. So man is I, ab is water, mikhoram is drink or eat. But what I didn't explain right now was ra. Man ab ra mikhoram. And ra in that case is like a ding 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 ding. This is the object. This is the thing that's going to have a verb performed on it. You don't know what the verb is yet because the verb comes at the end of the sentence in Persian. So that's very interesting. Another thing with Persian. So that's one of my most favorite things. And Japanese has the same thing. Japanese, instead of ra, the direct object identifier or the sound or what have you, is wo, or when you speak quickly, just o. So, in Japanese, you would say, what is watashi wa mizu o nomimasu? Basically, o in that case, mizu is water, and you say mizu o, similar to Iranians saying ab ra. Anyways, it's kind of really getting into the weeds, but the last thing I will say is that Persian ends with a verb. So it's subject, let's see, man, oh my God, subject, object, verb. So basically you would say, yeah. And so what ends up happening is that sometimes with very long sentences, and I noticed this with like newscasts, as new Persian learners are starting to get their hands dirty with the language, you'll say all of these things. For example, I was at the restaurant with my friends, seated under the table at 4 p.m. after school, but before dinner, I ate a cheesecake or something like that. Or something like, or rather you could say, I ate after school before the dinner under the table with my friends, a cheesecake, right? So like, or rather, sorry, I screwed that up. The verb should come at the end. But anyways, you don't understand, I guess you could say what the verb is until the very, very end of the sentence. So again, in that sentence, man abro mikhoram, I water raw drink. So that sometimes can take a while if the sentence is very long to understand, like, what is the action? What's the hullabaloo about this sentence?
Yeah. You know what that makes me think and wonder? What is the storytelling tradition like in Iran? Like, is there a rich history of telling stories? Because it seems to me, as someone who hasn't studied this language, when you have all of this information coming your way, you're kind of keeping people on the hook, and you're keeping them to kind of, okay, like to know what the verb is or to know what the action is. And you are bringing them along on this journey through your story. And I would imagine a language like Farsi, Persian, would lend itself very well to oral tradition of storytelling. Is that something that we've seen in Iran?
Yeah, of course, totally. I mean, there's always been a very, very huge tradition, to my knowledge, of oral storytelling, something that is we're obviously, the Persian language is filled with poetry, and Iranians are very proud of their history of poetry and storytelling that goes back, centuries and centuries and centuries. One of my kind of most favorite sort of things is that we have in Iran, we have this sort of, Hercules-esque epic known as the Shahnameh. It's kind of our equivalent of maybe the Iliad or the Odyssey or something like that. And a huge, huge epic poem story that tells great tales of, evil villains, like a Medusa-esque figure known as Zahak, and, then these, heroic protagonists such as Rostam, and Sohrab and all these things. And one of the things that happens is that obviously the entire sort of epic is quite long with many, many stories and many characters, again, just like kind of Homer's works. But something that's common is that, and I've never actually seen this myself, I've only seen videos of it, but apparently, I think in coffee houses or wherever, there's this tradition of people acting out, in front of like a wall sometimes, parts of this story and sort of maybe really, really animatedly narrating the story. And there's a word for it, it escapes me, but there's a specific tradition. And someone's like standing in front of a wall and like, oh, and then Rostam took his sword and stabbed it into the heart of this evil monster. And then the monster, and then it's like someone is really animatedly doing. There's even documentaries about this phenomenon of this sort of wall storytelling, if you could imagine it that way.
Yeah. Whoa.
So yeah. Yes, we do have very, very long tradition of storytelling, and it is quite beautiful. Hopefully, I mean, and ideally in a world where Iran and kind of the West had more of a relationship, I think more Americans would perhaps have the opportunity to learn more about this and see it. But again, these sorts of cultural exchanges are quite limited due to, years of political hostility and all that stuff.
I know. I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it. I feel like, well, I'm getting off topic, as I told you I would at some point, but like I want to go to Iran so bad. It looks so beautiful, and I'm sad.
Oh, yeah, no, I wish. I've always wanted to bring my American friends. I think when I was living in Iran, I haven't been back in like what, 7 years now, I think 7 or 8 years. Oh my. And yeah, no, I once went to the foreign ministry, to try to fill out a form or something to invite some of my American friends. And I just remember it being such a process, and specifically with Americans, it's quite difficult. They usually have to go through these like certified tour companies that have, minders that, basically the minders are just like, young 20-something, 30-something people that just follow around and like, do bureaucratic work, but they have to officially follow the American tour group, and yeah, it's a whole process.
Well, we hope for better days.
Yes. hopefully.
So tell us a bit about your upbringing, and a bit about, you told me, but going between the US, between Iran and the kind of, relationship that you've had with, between the US and Iran.
Yeah, for sure. So I was born in Los Gatos, California, sort of, I guess, Los Gatos / San Jose. The hospital is basically on the border, very close to both cities. And yeah, I was born there, but immediately after I was born, I think the last thing I was told was I was like 45 days old, something like that, very, very young. My family kind of took me, infant baby child, to Iran, and the entire family got to see the new baby, and that was a big deal. And I don't remember that, obviously, but then yeah, I basically, in my youth and when I was a kid, we moved back and forth between Iran and the United States quite significantly. And my understanding is, I think my parents were sort of, maybe toying with the idea of potentially either moving there or just kind of living a significant part of our lives there. With the baby, obviously you have family all around you in Iran, so they can take care of the baby. You want the family to be raised with the baby to be raised with family and all that stuff. So I think that must have been like a very big consideration for them. So yeah, again, in my formative early years, I spent a lot of time. When I was 3, I do remember this a lot more. We spent, I think, a very significant, like a year or so, I believe, in Iran. And then I also left kindergarten early in the United States and finished it at an international school in Iran for a little bit while I was there. And so, yeah, we had a little bit of back and forth. And it was also kind of like a very sensible trip for us to take. It's just the flight, essentially, and you pay for the flight, and then we're there for, let's say, the summer, and we're staying with family. It's free. We get to travel around. The currency kind of exchange gives us a little bit, the dollar compared to the Iranian rial, so we can travel around the country and go to restaurants. And it's a very, economically sensible family trip, but also a way to like instill the culture in a child and all that stuff. So I was very, very privileged to have this opportunity as a kid and to be able to frequently go to Iran. And naturally, with Persian being my first language, that just kind of lent itself naturally to me in engaging with my family and, learning to speak Persian just, normally like an Iranian kid would. I would play with kids sometimes in the street. We had these little plastic soccer balls. Anyways, yeah, so Iran was a very significant part of my upbringing as a kid. And then after my parents got a divorce when I was 7, we wouldn't obviously spend magnificent giant chunks of time there as much, but my dad loved going back. He loved going back. So basically I would spend the summer, like 3 months of summer between,
Oh my gosh.
one part of whatever, 5th, 4th grade, whatever year, in Iran. And my dad's sort of hobby, he loved exploring villages, like rural villages in Iran. And as a kid, obviously American kid, I'm watching Power Rangers, Rugrats, McDonald's, like, and I'm like, I'm using the Western American toilet. And then this village is like everything but all those things. So there's no TV, there's no Power Ranger. I mean, there's TV, I should say, but it's just, local, channels and and so, and the bathroom situation is, taking some getting used to for me as a kid, the squatting toilet, which actually is better for you, honestly, in terms of
ergonomically.
Evacuating your bowels and all that stuff. So, but I didn't like it. So, but he loved it. So he would drag me along. We'd just be on these like, multi-hour long road trips in the middle of what I would consider nowhere. We'd come across a small village and we'd spend the night there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time as a kid in rural parts of Iran, which is, I think, a little bit of a different experience than, the more cosmopolitan capital city, Tehran, and all that stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna tell you a quick story, and this is about you. So I'm gonna make this the story's about me, but this episode's about you. So it's so funny. Like, I relate to that on a smaller level. Like, my mom's family is Bahamian, so we spent our summers in the Bahamas. And I remember, like, growing up in the 80s, all my friends were going to Disney World and they were going to Tampa and stuff like that. And then, we would always go to the Bahamas, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to be in the Magic Kingdom. Like, I'm not interested. And the thing was, like, we would go with my grandmother and see her friends and, go around. And when I'm laughing because when we would get to the airport, I'd see all these people going to the resort, and they got to go on water slides and they got to have, like, burgers and fries and all the things that kids want. But we were like on the other side in my great grandmother's house, and it was just like very not the opposite of New York City, right? So I just remember always feeling like, I want what everybody else has, but then I'm also in, telling this story because I know, like as you've grown up, you've come to appreciate those experiences and really reconnect with them and relate to them more. And I just think it's so cool how, as kids, we think we know everything and we know what we want, but then we eventually come around to kind of appreciate these smaller experiences.
Oh, totally. It's very relatable. No, I completely agree with you. I think in the moment, I just wanted Dunkaroos and burgers, and I wanted all the things that, I mean, let's be frank, my American friends were having. And I grew up in a largely like white American town with like the picket fence and the lawns, and you can just imagine suburbia in that sort of sense. And going to Iran, and also it's like, you also don't have something to come back with at show and tell. When you're in elementary school, when you're middle school, like, people are like, what's Iran? Blah, 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 blah. Like, no one really cares. It's like, well, me and like so-and-so went to Disney. Yeah, exactly. Disneyland. And like, everyone's like, oh, so cool. Did you get to like, oh, you saw the Mickey Mouse? Like, you saw the 55-year-old man dressed up as Mickey Mouse? Like, and people are like, yeah, it was so cool. But, I mean, it's funny because now as adults, people are very interested in travel and Iran. Wow, that's so cool. And I'm very grateful that my parents and, mainly my dad really, really forced me to go on this trip. And again, it may not have been cool then, but looking back on it now, I mean, the language skills that I developed, my gut bacteria in my intestines is now more diverse, and the food I got to eat, again, it's just, and now being able to communicate, and I think one of the things that's so sad is because of the lack of a relationship between Iran and the United States, because for 44 years now, A lot of Iranian Americans, of which there are hundreds of thousands, some say a million, over a million, depending on how you measure who is Iranian American. One parent is, one parent isn't, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of Iranian Americans haven't had the opportunity to be able to connect with, the culture in the motherland. Maybe they don't, and many of them don't speak. And I hear so many
Mm.
stories. I work sometimes in the Persian language instruction space. And I hear stories sometimes, and it like breaks my heart, where families move to the United States and they're very, very keen on assimilation, especially because of this very tumultuous relationship between Iran and the United States, where Iran, had a very bloody revolution and all that stuff. And then there was the hostage crisis where American diplomats were taken hostage in 1979, 80. And so many Iranians who come here, there was a lot of anti-Iranian sentiment. So they kind of just
Mm.
suppressed this part of their identity. Some people changed their names. There's a lot of, anthropological accounts of people saying they're Persian instead of Iranian to kind of mask
Mm.
the connection. Some people said they were Greek or Italian. Some people even said they
Wow.
were Lebanese, right? It was actually more convenient to say you were Arab in, that time because of, popular consensus and perceptions in the United States
That's
than it was
crazy.
to say Iranian, because Iran, again, big revolution, bloody anti-American revolution, American hostages. So Americans were like, so Iranians coming here just tried to mask that. And some of them, also, I hear this a lot. It's so interesting speaking to other Iranian Americans. Like my parents, didn't want to teach me Persian because they just wanted to make sure that I could blend into American society
Yeah.
as much as possible, given the extreme hardship that the parents faced in terms of blending in terms of immigration can be difficult and agonizing. And so, it's about, I totally understand. I'm not here to blame anyone for anything. Like circumstances are circumstances, and had history unfolded differently, maybe the parents would be like, oh, it's safe. Like, let's teach you this and teach you that. But because of circumstances, that happens. And so, yeah, that's why, to kind of bring it back, I think having that connection to the homeland, it's just a bummer that it's so many folks I see them, they really want to go and they can't. Sometimes maybe they don't have an Iranian passport. Maybe their parents were political refugees due to the revolution of
Mm-hmm.
1979. There's so many reasons.
Yeah.
And yeah, not to go on about this, but
It's okay.
I just wish in an ideal world, like more of our diaspora community had this privilege. And maybe in the future, if there's a change of some sort in Iran, more of us can have this connection. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I hope for that too. I really do. Yeah,
Mm,
it must be hard to be so far from your or so disconnected from your homeland and the
mm,
land of your parents, your grandparents, and
hmm
I really wish that for our Iranian American brothers and sisters.
thank you. I hope so too. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
I want to go back to the rural villages that you
Yeah.
visited in
Yeah.
Iran
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
this is so cool to me. When you were if you were old enough to think about this at the time, or maybe in
Mm,
retrospect, I don't know. But I would imagine a country as beautiful and big and vast and diverse as Iran. The language changes as you're moving through different parts of the
mm.
country. When you were visiting these rural villages, did you notice communication changing in any ways, or did you notice, or since as you've been back as an adult, like have you noticed how communication changes or how the language has specific nuances in different
Mm.
places that it doesn't have in others?
Yeah, so what's interesting is Iran, like you mentioned perfectly, Iran is a very ethnically and linguistically diverse place. Again, Persian is the official language of the country. It is the language that, the public schools will teach everyone. But in people's homes, people might speak a different language, right? Depending on the region you're from. Iran has something like, I think, eight, let's just kind of put a date, but it might be somewhere around there. Several, let's say, several major ethnic groups. There are obviously Persians, there are Arabs, there are Kurds, there are Turks, there are Baluch people, and the list goes on. Lor, and then what am I missing? Turkmen. Anyway, all these different ethnic groups. And of course, that comes with a lot of, and oh, Azeri. How could I forget? Azeris are huge, huge, huge contingent in Iran. And so Azerbaijan, they speak Azeri, and so Azeri is a very common language. I think in the rural towns that we would go to, they would speak this Turkic language of Azeri, and I obviously didn't understand any of it. My dad's mom and my dad's dad, so my paternal grandparents, they somehow spoke Azeri, even though I don't
Mm.
believe they were ethnically Azeri. I don't even understand the connection of why they could understand it and speak it, but for whatever reason, that is their situation and they spoke. And so they understood, but they didn't come with us on these trips. So it was me and my dad and his side of his cousins. So Azeri would be spoken. I mean, it's so long ago that for me it was just this like, what is this mysterious language? So I probably
Mm.
couldn't fully grasp where we were and what language was being spoken. But Azeri, I'm very certain Azeri was definitely part of that experience. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of the thing. And then obviously, the village people in the villages, if their native tongue is Azeri, if it's Kurdish, if it's, what have you, they will speak Persian with an accent. Uh, and that was something I did notice. And even that accent sometimes made it a little bit difficult. Accent and also like, the sort of mannerisms and the colloquialisms and the idioms that they might use made it difficult for me as an like Iranian American who learned Persian mostly in the US to like also understand them, even though we're all speaking Persian. It's almost like I'm listening to an Afghan speak Persian or
Wow.
Dari as it's called, right? For me, sometimes I'll be like, oh, what is he saying? Oh, it's like Yara, the bathroom's over there. Yara, the bath that she said the bathroom's over there. Like so my dad would, translate sometimes. So it's really incredible. And you really get to see like just to go into these villages and see that there is a whole other linguistic world within Iran that exists, and yeah, but that's the thing. It's very, very limited for me. Those memories, these are from like 25 years ago. It's like how old was I? 7, something like that. A whole other world. Yeah.
As you've traveled back as an adult, how have you noticed language? Well, this is maybe I should ask this in two
Mm,
parts.
mm,
Um, as you've traveled back as an adult, and you like you said, you learned Persian here in the US. So I'm thinking, and I always think this with any
mm,
language, when you
mm,
have when you're learning from your family that has immigrated, the language is there and it's fundamental, but in
mm,
certain ways it gets stuck in time. So
mm.
there are things that you say or things that were said maybe, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then when you go back, people are like, nobody says that anymore. Or like, you sound
Yeah.
like my grandmother or something like that. Like, did you have any instances like that? And I guess the second part of that question is, how have you noticed in all these years of going back and forth, how have you noticed the language changing at all?
That's a very, very fascinating and important point. And I'm so glad you put your finger on this because so generally, again, because there was this very traumatic, world changing event, the 1979 revolution in Iran, that led to basically the ballooning of the Iranian American diaspora and generally the Iranian diaspora, I would say. Like it really, really started to grow at a very accelerated pace because of this historical event. So you have this sort of break from that moment. So it's almost like there's, pre 1979 Persian and post 1979 Persian
Mm.
spoken among. And I will say they're still largely the same. It's not they're really small differences, but you can definitely see sometimes if you go, for example, in Los Angeles, which has a lot of folks that immigrated to the U.S. at that time that form the community colloquially referred to as Tehrangeles, the little Iranianville in L.A.
They're
You can definitely
fraudulous.
uh-huh. Oh yeah, yeah. Google that. You'll find some fun videos
That's
about, it's
so
like
cute.
and so, you'll see some, again, slight differences in how people speak, some terms and idioms that are used. I'm trying to recall now, like what specific phrases and things were used then. For example, one time I was listening to an interview with the former queen of Iran, part of the previous regime, and she was referring to the word airplane as tayyare. Tayyare comes from an Arabic word, ta'ira. Ta'ira means plane in Arabic. So Iranians had just taken the Arabic word for many years and would say, I guess some sort of version of the word that the Iranians took, but they turned ta'ira into tayyare. And she kept saying it on this interview. And I was like, what does that word mean? This is before I had learned Arabic in college. And basically the word that Iranians now not almost everyone uses for the word airplane is haval payma. It's a new word that was created by Iran's equivalent of the Modern Language Association, like MLA Iranian style, where they go in and they specifically identify, sometimes foreign words, whether from Arabic or English or whatever, and they try to come up with a Persian equivalent.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so they've done that in the past, and one of the words that successfully was replaced was tayyare ta'ira, airplane from Arabic, and they turned it into hawapema. And so, I'm not saying I go to LA and I hear people say tayyare. I've really only heard the Queen say this in an interview, but it is an example of some of the phrases. Like another phrase, for example, that maybe may have been or is joked sometimes in modern Iran to may have been more common in the past is like durud bar shoma. Durud bar shoma would be like, I guess peace be upon you or something like that, or I believe that might be the translation, or greetings upon you or something like that for hello, greetings be upon you. I don't know. Today we Iranians, and even before in the past as well, I don't want to say that this was some sort of thing that people would, but we say salam. Salam is hello. It's from Arabic, Islam, salam, all these things are related. Assalamu alaikum, so it's an Arabic word. We all say it. It's super simple. It's super fast, super easy. But, there was kind of a joke in this program by Mehran Modiri when I was, I think even about like a decade ago, this program came about. And he was specifically making fun of the pre-revolutionary Iranian Persian versus the post-revolutionary Persian, and how the pre-revolutionary ones, sometimes they really, he kind of was making this joke of like, oh, they really like to use the super Persian, like old school phrases. And he kept saying, durud bar shoma, durud bar shoma, greetings be upon you, greetings be upon you, greetings. And it just sounded so funny to him, and to one of us who just says salam, hello, boom, quick, fast. Mm-hmm. But again, also salam was very common before 1979. This is not in any way for me to say that. But I guess, how do I explain? It's just kind of like a maybe durud bar shoma perhaps may have been used a slight bit more back then.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, that's really deep cuts. Like, I wonder if your listeners would find that interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I always wonder about that, because language is living, language is alive, and to your talking about the revolution in 1979, that's a traumatic experience, and that affects people in so many ways, and in so many ways to different degrees is what I'm trying to say. And I didn't really think about it before, asking that question, but that would obviously affect language also, because language is alive, and it created a shift, I imagine. And
I will note one thing, I mean, just in between what you're saying, that maybe more demonstrably, I think the 1979 revolution is referred to as the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini, this sort of Muslim cleric, became the supreme leader of Iran, essentially, and established what's known as the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the current kind of regime that governs the country. And one thing that is commonly colloquially said, and I can anecdotally sort of point to this, so I don't have access to a statistical report, but it would appear that a lot more Arabic phrases, sometimes taken perhaps from religious teachings of Islam, have sort of entered modern colloquial spoken Persian today. More so, I mean, Persian, I think needs to be said, has always had a significant number of Arabic words in it. But I will say some of the more perhaps religious teachings that are now, broadcast much more heavily on state television than they were prior to the revolution. And just like a lot of things are usually couched in those religious teachings now, because the government is being run by, religious clerics,
right,
in many ways. Those have seeped into the language more. So I would say that sometimes is the difference. Sometimes you'll see these like young, hip, cool Tehran Iranians, religious or not, they'll use some of these phrases that are very couched in Arabic, Islamic sort of language, but they've entered the colloquial sphere. And so now that may be one big difference, for example, in the past kind of colloquial Persian before 1979 and today. So I figured that might be like a worthwhile, more of like a general trend I've noticed.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I mentioned to you that I became familiar with your work through my friend in Sydney, my friend Candace, and she is a Persian speaker, learner, and lover of all things Persian. And I asked her if she had a question for you.
Oh,
so I want to ask her question, ask this question on her behalf. She would love to know, what is one recommendation you have for non-Iranians learning Farsi
Mm,
for how to engage in the culture and or community in a meaningful way?
mm.
And she's specifically talking about not so much about um, advocacy about Iranian issues, but about building genuine relationships, etc.
Mm. So, well, one very functional thing, I think, I'm going to plug this in here because a friend of mine runs this wonderful online Persian language instruction program. It's called Chai and Conversation.
Oh,
It is lovely. Even the graphic design and the interface design of the website, so easy to use, so fun. And it actually brings together Persian learners from all over the English speaking world, and you have this sort of online community. You speak to each other. There's live sessions, there's chat sessions where the different learners are talking to each other. And again, you build this. Some people like, oh, I have an Iranian spouse, so I wanted to learn. Oh, I'm going to travel to Iran. I want to learn a little bit here. I just have an interest in Iran and Iranian culture, so I'm going to join this program. So I highly recommend functionally. In terms of more like lived experience, I mean, I think one thing I've noticed is that Iranians will congregate at Iranian places. So whether it's an Iranian tea shop or whether it's an Iranian restaurant in New York City, there's a lot of great ones. Two of my favorites are Sofre and Aval. But I think maybe frequenting those sorts of places, although I will say maybe Sofra and Aval may not be a place where you can meet other Iranians to like really get to know the community and maybe make some friends. So perhaps a better spot would be the Iranian tapas bar in Bushwick, Masquerade. That's a great spot where people make friends. It's just such a lively, just sort of gregarious sort of, people and environment. That's a great spot. But yeah, I'd say Masquerade is a great spot to meet folks. But yeah, my recommendation would be to like frequent Iranian spaces, supermarkets. If you want to meet another Iranian, make a friend while you're staring at the saffron packets, look over to your left and say, ha, this is so expensive. And the other person might be like, yes, what's your name? I don't know. That maybe I'm imagining some sort of weird rom-com scenario at a Persian supermarket. But
it's a Persian meet cute.
yeah, exactly. We met while staring at the same saffron packet. Yeah, that would be my thing. Again, functionally, the language program, build community, and then real life, like go into some spaces. I highly recommend.
Yeah, okay. I might try a few of those myself, I think.
Yeah, definitely recommend. They're all great.
What were some things that helped you to um reconnect
Mm,
um with your heritage, with your Persian heritage and language? And I should say this, I don't think we set this up for the listener, but as you
mm,
spoke to me about,
mm,
getting older and getting to that point in high school, college where you felt more of a connection and you were being
mm,
intent about reconnecting with your heritage and your language. Like, what was that like for you, and maybe why did you feel that urge
mm.
to reconnect?
Ooh, a great question. I can definitely trace it back to, let's see, the first time I, actively started to consider, like really pursuing an interest in my own heritage and improving my language skills. Again, my Persian as a kid was, I mean, good enough to talk to my parents and talk about very simple things, but certainly not good enough to like even fully understand perhaps a newscast in Persian, or even fully understand it like an Iranian film. And so I think I can trace it back to senior year of high school. I believe that's what it was. Gosh, I have to like trace back these memories because I was thinking about this and I can't really tell if it was senior year or junior year. In any case, it was around that time, senior year, and 2009, there in Iran, there was a massive, massive protest movement. Actually, you could say it's quite comparable to the one that we just observed over the past several months, the sort of women life freedom movement, that was led by women. Against Iran's current sort of government regime, I should say. And 2009 was what was called the Green Movement. It was a huge, huge protest. Sometimes, some estimates say like hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting the results of what was said to be a fraudulent election that re-elected the sort of the conservative firebrand president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, even though sort of the opposition candidate Mir Hossein Mousavi was, protesters said, the candidate should have won the election had there been no rigging. and this is what was reported, and so on and so forth. And so that movement was known as the Green Movement because a lot of the sort of the color of the Mousavi campaign, the opposition members' campaign, was green. So you see all these green wristbands, green headbands, green, headscarves, green shirts, and this just like sea of green just flooded, specifically Tehran. And that sort of really activated me, I think. At that time, 2009, I was just graduating from high school. And I just remember kind of vividly, like, this is the first time I could see a reflection of myself in Iran. I was like, oh my God, like, look at all these young people. I'd always traveled to Iran. I'd see family, and family's cool and cousins are cool, but like, cool hipster people are way cooler than like these kids are so fashionable, and like the way they wore their green wristbands, it's almost like being on the G train or the L train, being like, oh my God, you are so fashionable, like that's so cool, or you look so cool. And so I remember just being taken by these super cool young people that looked like me, right? No one in my, suburban town really looks like me. But then there's this entire country where everyone looks like me. Everyone has well, not everyone, I can't say this, but thick eyebrows and like, pronounced noses. And these are all like features that are common. And so I think that was what moved me. I was like, what are these young people so passionate about? They're protesting every day. And that got me involved. I started to read the news voraciously. And I suddenly, and up until that point, I remember kind of being like the Iranian in my high school. Teachers would come up to me and sort of ask me questions about Iran. Iran's president was very conservative and just was making headlines for some of his really, outrageous statements. And teachers would come up to me. Yeah, you remember Ahmadinejad was, like, oh, Yara, so this Iran situation, this president yesterday on the news, he said this thing. Yara, what do you make of it? What do your parents make of it? I mean, I'd just be like after class, like the science teacher would like ask me questions and I'd be like, I don't know. And I'm like wearing my skate shoes, trying to go home and like watch Dragon Ball Z. And here I am being asked questions about the conservative president of Iran as if I'm a political analyst. So that sort of goaded me in the direction of like, oh, maybe I should learn more. And then this protest movement happened in 2009. And I was like, oh my God, I should definitely learn more. And I want to learn more. I want to be able to field these questions and answer them, appropriately. And so after that, I sort of switched gears. I wanted to be a video game journalist, like, from my teenage years. And I switched gears to wanting to be a journalist that covered Iran. I wanted to travel to Iran and live there and report for a Western publication to ideally, in my utopian ideal mind, help dispel these misunderstandings between Americans and Iranians, and in this sort of unicorn pony, triceratops, fantasy land of my own, Iranians and Americans could come together in peace, and you could bridge the two broken halves of our identities, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff that a 18-year-old might think of. And so, yeah, that from 2009 onwards, that was the sort of activation moment for me, was the Green Movement, the protests against the disputed election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And from there, I just became, I have a very sort of compulsive like attitude about things that I'm passionate about, whether it's video games, if it's Persian, if it's Iranian politics, like I will rabbit hole the shit out of that, and so I went down, so many Wikipedia pages, I watched so many YouTube videos, I bought books, I got the Rosetta Stone for Persian, which is very outdated and not, definitely needs a little bit of sprucing up. I'm sure they've spruced it maybe in the past, 15 years, but just went down. And then I transferred to New York University after my freshman year. And lo and behold, they had Persian language classes. And so I immediately enrolled. I took the classes. Then I took Persian literature classes. And I spent every summer of college, so sophomore year summer, or freshman year summer, sophomore year summer, junior year summer, in Iran. I spent all 3 months in Iran taking more Persian language classes at the University of Tehran, sort of sister institute, the Dehoda Institute. No, I was like, this is what I mean, like rabbit holing it. I just like fully was like, I need to learn everything. I started watching BBC Persian, which is really a Persian language TV broadcast of, I would just come home from class in college and just like sit there and watch and then write down all the words I didn't understand that the newscasters were saying. I memorized the whole staff of BBC Persian. Like they all became like these characters, like this reporter, that reporter.
Oh my
gosh. And No, I just got super into it, and every summer being in Iran, I would again not only take classes, but then also start translating for friends and artists and documentary filmmakers and all that stuff. And yeah, until I basically decided to move there after college and be a freelance journalist for Western publications, hoping to achieve that dream. And sort of came crumbling down after a few events, but that's a whole story in itself.
While we're here, I'd love to hear, and I'd love for my listeners to hear, some of the some of your journalism work, some of the stories that you've done, some of your reporting.
Mm.
Let us know all that good stuff and where we can read your work or see your work,
Yes.
etc.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've definitely taken a turn from being like a print reporter in Tehran. Uh, After moving back, I mean, kind of the summary of it is I got a job at AJ Plus, which is Al Jazeera's sort of digital young people branch. And I started making news videos for them, but then I transitioned slowly over time. I've been there for 7 years to making these documentaries that I would host and produce. And in large part in the earlier years, I would play a significant role in the editing process as well, like video editing. And our show is titled "Eat This with Yara." It's a show that looks at the intersection of like food with culture, society, politics, the environment, science. Basically, anytime food intersects with an issue, it's kind of a story or a history. It's kind of something that we might pounce on and try to see if we can sort of tell that story. So yeah, I mean, that stuff is all on YouTube. I mean, it's on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, but YouTube is the most searchable. You can go see our documentaries. Yeah, we've been making them for about like 4.5 years or so, 5 years now. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why my friend told me you got to check out what Yara's doing because I was writing my book at the time. I have it's a book, it's a zine,
Mm,
it's a thing I created, talking about language and food
mm.
and the connections between language and culture and food. And it has some recipes in there too. So she was like, "Oh, you gotta check out Yara and see what he's doing." And
Oh,
I'm a fan of your series, so
oh, thank you.
thank you for making it. And
Oh,
this is amazing. This is like so cool. All the work that you do and the work that you've done.
oh,
I will add links to those in the show notes for this episode so that people who are listening can click and find you and your work right away.
oh, thank you so much. That's really like uplifting to hear that. And yeah, I mean, yeah, we've been privileged to be able to continue the show for quite some time, and hopefully we'll be able to do more. I think we're gonna hopefully try to do an international episode or so this year. We've never done that before, so maybe there's something there. We'll see. Um, but it's such an interesting, I mean, it's a very weird niche, and sometimes it can be tough for us to find ideas and topics that we want to go after because it's very much, we can't just do a piece on like delicious food, and we can't just do a piece on like a history. It has to be a very, it's like a history that demonstrates in some way like human resilience or something like that, and then it has to have some food tie-in, and then it's just finding those sorts of stories where that might work is it's part of the challenge, it's part of the fun. And
Yeah.
we've I mean, one of my, I've just kind of raised one of the weirdest ones is how we found this phallic shaped clam that is indigenous to the Pacific Northwest of the United States.
I remember
And
that one.
yeah, that was a very interesting, but what's interesting is that this phallic clam, this, I mean, for lack of a better word, penis shaped clam, has helped revive Native American community, a Native American community in that region, because they export it to China, where it's a very prized seafood,
Hmm.
and they make tons of money.
Yeah.
And they've been able to fund social services for their indigenous community. And so that's the kind of intersection of, there's geopolitics there, there's economy, there's indigenous history, and so there's this clan that's quite delicious.
Yeah.
Anyways, but yeah.
I definitely encourage my listeners to to watch your stories because I just think they're so masterfully crafted and
Oh,
created.
thank
And the
you.
way that you tell a story is like so inspiring. Like to me, I'm like, I want to be more like Yara when I tell stories
Oh,
because I have a lot to learn from someone like you. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, that you will do, that you have done. And it's great. It's like I'm just so happy to be, to know you and to know your work. So,
Oh, thank you, Elle. It's very, very
yeah,
sweet. I
you're
appreciate that.
you're amazing. Well, thank you so much again for this conversation. I don't think you told us where we can find you on social
Ah,
media.
yes.
Just let us know where we can find you on social so we can all go run and follow you.
Yeah, so I think I'm most active on Instagram. So my username is at Yelmjouie. So it's the first letter of my first name and then my whole last name, Elmjouie. So Y Elmjouie. You can find me there. A lot of my videos are cross-posted with AJ Plus. So if I have something, I work for AJ Plus. So any video that I make for AJ Plus will also now, thankfully to this new feature, be cross-posted on my page. And you can also just search my name on YouTube and you'll see all manner of me, eating a phallic clam or me doing God knows what. So all manner of things.
All your adventures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add that to the show notes also.
Amazing. Yeah.
And yeah, this has been such an amazing conversation. And I'm so grateful, so happy that you had the time to come and talk with me today.
Oh, I'm so touched that you had the time to reach out to me and
Oh my gosh.
orchestrate this. It's such a pleasure to be on this podcast. I love talking about languages. So thank you for
Oh,
having me, Elle.
of course. I like to end on the same question
Mm,
also every episode. I do this because this is my chance to learn, my
mm,
chance to try something new.
mm.
Do you have any jokes, popular
Ooh.
sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Persian and Farsi
Ooh.
to share
Okay. Yes, I
and
did think about this.
to teach us?
Well, I do have a poem, and I'm kind of a little bit of a broken record player here with this poem because it is one of my favorites. It also is one of the very few poems or parts of a poem that I've memorized. But it's a poem from Hafez, and two of the lines are, I think two. مقام امن می بیغش و رفیق شفیق گرت مدام میسر شود زهی توفیق. So that is a safe place, مقام امن, may بیغش. So let me just go. A safe place, pure, unadulterated wine, and loyal friends. If all of those are provided, that, my friend, is success.
Oh,
So yeah, that's kind of one of my favorites.
I love that.
Yeah, the simple things of life, right? Like,
Yeah.
wine, whether it's sustenance or food, whatever it is, really loyal, رفيق شفيق, loyal friends and a safe, a roof over your head. You're there with your friends, you're having some food, you're having wine, whatever it is, you're together, you're being happy.
Yeah.
What is life besides, I mean, I know we like to climb the career ladder, get the thing, get this, get that, but if you don't have friends and you don't have shelter, and I don't know, I just feel like, yeah, those are kind of the
Yeah.
key rungs of life.
That's what we need in life.
Yeah.
That's all I need in life. I
Yeah.
will confirm that.
I'm trying. I can offer you more if you want. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I have, but I think
If
that's yeah.
Yeah. So since that's long, in the
Yeah.
interest of time,
Yeah.
I would like to take this slow and repeat after you a few
Oh,
words at a time
okay.
and try maybe my first Persian sentences.
Ooh, okay. Yeah.
And I apologize to my Iranian brothers and sisters for the mispronunciations I will have, but I'm trying. And
Yeah.
that's what learning a language is about. So I'm ready when you are, and I have my pencil if I have to write anything down. So
Yeah.
take it away.
I will just say people don't speak like this. Is very much poetry language,
That's okay.
but good. Okay. So it's مقام امن. So that would be, yeah, you want to try مقام.
Makame
And this one's a little difficult because it's a couple consonants together. Amn.
amn.
Perfect. Perfect. مقام امن.
Makame amn.
That means safe place. Meye birash. So you would say, yeah.
Meye birash.
Meye bir. Like the R in French.
I
Rash.
know, it's the high, like in Arabic. I'm working my way through it.
Yeah, you can do it. You can do it. Yeah.
Okay, start over.
So, yeah, مقام امن مي بی غش
Meyebirash.
Perfect.
Oh,
مرا معم می بیرش مرا معم و می بیرش و رفیق شفیق. Oh, this is the قاف.
ah!
رفیق شفیق.
Rafira Shafiq.
Exactly. And to think about this word, we've all seen Lion Kings. Oh God, I sound like my parents. Have you seen the Lion Kings? The Lions Kings? Anyway, but
Stop it.
I love it. But the name Rafiki, you know that character, the baboon. Rafiki is an Arabic word. Rafiq is an Arabic word for friend.
Yeah.
So Rafiki actually means my friend. Rafiqi, my friend.
Yeah.
So think about this. Rafiq Shafiq. So friend is Rafiq. Shafiq is like loyal. So
Rafiq. Wait, one more time.
Rafiq Shafiq.
Rafiq Shafiq.
Shafiq. Think about it as a G. Shafiq. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Think of it as a K.
Shafiq.
Shafiq.
Okay.
Rafiq Shafiq. Oh, this is okay. We're almost there. Garat Modam.
Garat. Modam.
Moyassar. Shavad. Zehi. Tawfiq. So, I mean, I don't expect you to remember. It's quite, but yeah. Nagom ma'am me'avi rasho rafiq shafiq garat modam moyassar shavad zehi tawfiq.
You make it sound so good, Yara. No, this is great. No, this is really great because, and I like to do this at the end of every episode because obviously there are sounds that I am not familiar with making. And I'm actually supposed to be learning Arabic right now. And I didn't get very far yet. But that's one of like the line is like where I've like, it's going to take me a while to and I want to do this because I want people listening to just know that like, yeah, you could be intimidated or you could be worried about making mistakes, but like you're supposed to make mistakes because that's how you get better, and that's how you know that I want people to try. So I put myself out there to try some new sounds. And another note about Rafiki, what's interesting is that it's a lot of the names in The Lion King come from Swahili, and Swahili is greatly influenced by Arabic. So this is like all coming together.
Right? It's crazy when you think about the links.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Thanks for teaching me that.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thanks for your
I can
patience.
write it out for you in an email as well.
Yeah, please, because I think that's such a beautiful saying as well. So thanks for teaching me, for teaching us. Hopefully my listeners practiced along with us in saying that. So, this has been amazing.
Yeah, this has been lovely. Thank you so much, Elle.
In this situation, after you've been talking to someone for quite some time, if you're in Iran, or you're speaking with someone who also speaks Persian, Farsi, what is the best way to say goodbye?
Well, we'll do two things. Obviously, you can just goodbye normally, and it's in Persian we say Khodafez.
Khodafez.
And it's interesting, in Urdu they also say Khodafez in Pakistan. So it's a very fascinating sort of but yes, Khoda Hafiz means may God protect you. So, but we just kind of slip it together and we say Khodafez. That's one way. So if you want to try
Khodafez.
Perfect. And then another thing to do is you've now done some work for an hour and a half, right? And you've accomplished this, this podcast has come together. It's taken effort, or you may be a little tired. So what we say usually after a big sort of hurdle or something that requires effort is we'll say bravo, right? It's kind of like a bravo. We say khaste naboshid.
Khaste naboshid.
And it naboshid with a D.
Naboshid, haste naboshid.
And what that translates to is don't be tired. Like it's almost an acknowledgement of, bravo, you've tired yourself. I don't know how to describe bravo, like you've crossed this mountain, you've scaled this mountain. Bravo, don't be tired. Like I acknowledge your your labor
Oh my
and your
gosh.
tiredness. I don't know. So خسته نباشید, you might say that to someone after a long, arduous, or not arduous. I mean, this wasn't really arduous, but something big and long that you've
With an
accomplished.
effort. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh.
After a basketball game, you could tell your friend who played basketball with his friends, hey, bravo, خسته نباشید. You just played for an hour. You must be tired, and you won. Yeah, so, yeah.
Oh, wow. Those are great. Let me try to remember how to say them. Khodafis, Yara, خسته نباشید.
Great. Excellent.
Yara, thank you so much again, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Lovely. Looking forward to it, Elle.
Bye.
Bye.
New episodes of Speaking Tongues are available every Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to like and share episodes with other language lovers like ourselves. Khodafis.